Good morning. Want to thank committee members, chairman, and members of the public for joining us this morning. I want to thank my colleagues and the extraordinary council staff who made today possible, especially OGC. Big thanks and shout out to the OCFO. They have a lot on their plate. Legislative services who moved mountains under intense timelines. So I want us to be very clear. The Rental Act as introduced was not my bill, but we're at a serious inflection point for affordable housing in our city. And it's my job to fix what comes to this committee, to make sure that we pass, that what we pass isn't just politically expedient, but actually works for the people who need us most. I have met with constituents, agencies, housing providers, advocates, you name it. I hosted multiple public town halls in different parts of the city. I visited housing. I chaired a 13-hour hearing on this bill. And I know that there are no simple answers here. The reality, DC is facing a real, measurable, and worsening housing crisis. And the problem is that there just isn't enough housing. What that means for our residents who already can't afford rent in DC is that if we do nothing, the cost of housing will increase. In 2022, DC issued permits for 7,234 multifamily units. 2022, 7,234 multifamily, can we get this up? Housing units. In 2024, only 1,239. That is more than an 80% drop in 2 years. Meanwhile, our population is growing. We don't have to be math experts to understand what happens if we have a substantial decline in new construction of housing and an increase in population. It means the rent for people that we represent will get more expensive, and they can't pay that. DC's rental vacancy rate is 6.1%, which is a full percentage point less than the nationwide vacancy rate. That is low. And we have a shortage of 37,429 units that are affordable and available to people with the lowest incomes. So costs are high because we don't have enough affordable units, but construction has slowed because people don't want to build here. Now, this isn't a national trend, it's a DC problem, one we made worse through short-term thinking and one-sided policymaking. I want to move to our next slide that shows the share of total building permits across the region so that we share the understanding that this is a DC problem and not a problem impacting the entire region. Are we getting that queued up?
Yes.
So, as you can see, DC went from producing 65% of the share of the total multifamily building permits for the region in 2020, continues to drop. We're at 10% now. Now, when the mayor held a press conference on this bill, she said it was about helping landlords and made clear who was at the table. That's how you signal. That is not how you legislate or get a bill passed. Governing means that everyone gets a seat at the table and everyone shares the burdens and the benefits. The original bill would have made one group happy and left the rest of DC holding the bag. So let's stop pretending that you can fix a broken housing system by blaming only landlords or only tenants. I get texts every day from tenant advocates and landlords both saying, I'm in the other side's pocket. Here's the truth. They're both wrong. My job isn't to pick a side. It's not to listen to the people who yell at me the loudest. It's to write laws and stand up in the real world for the average DC resident. Those are the families that I come from. We spent months doing what the executive should have done before the bill was ever introduced, talking to residents, sitting down with Superior Court judges, looking at data, and asking tough questions. The mayor didn't do that legwork. As a result, she proposed statutory court timelines that every judge told me would only add to the backlog, not speed it up. Why? Because DC currently has a 16% judicial vacancy rate on the Superior Court, which is set to go up to 22% by the end of the year. So what the mayor did was diagnose a solution without understanding what the problem was. So the timeline for evictions is not a result of the absence of a timeline in our statute. It's a result of the absence of judges on the bench. When it comes to TOPA, some have said that the 15-year exemption will gut tenant protections. In reality, only about 4% of TOPA transactions occur in buildings that are 15 years or newer. This change is about preserving affordability for the future while still respecting the spirit of tenant rights. What we are talking about in the 15 years, so this chart illustrates the buildings built after 1978 compared to the building before 1978. So we are talking about a fraction of that blue sliver if you can make it out. That sliver represents 50 years. We're talking about exemptions for buildings made in the past 15 years, which represent about 4% of TOPA transactions. The trade-off here is important. So we need to be honest about the cost of inaction. Every year that we fail to address these issues, and we don't want to address them because it's not fun, and I don't want to address them any more than anyone else, but when we don't address them, more affordable units disappear and more families get pushed out. When tenants receive buyouts, this is important, that money doesn't just vanish any more than it just appeared from thin air. It gets added to the cost of housing for the next tenants, making the housing less affordable. So if we are called to expand and preserve affordable housing, then we have to be weary of policies and procedures that add costs onto the next residents in that housing. We need to be consistent and prioritize long-term affordability over short-term payouts. If we could have it all, I'd say let's have it all. But we're in a budget crisis and we can't have it all. So we have to prioritize. And I believe that affordability, particularly long-term affordability for the many, is a more important priority than short-term cash payouts for the few. Ultimately, my goal is to ensure that we are truly solving problems and working in the best interest of the people of DC. I'm committed to finding the best solutions available and continuing to work until we get it right. Let's stay focused on making DC a place where everyone can afford to live. We didn't just cut performative provisions for the sake of it. We listened to the courts, to the tenants, to the small landlords, and many of them Black and brown, who told us the real pain points. We preserved what's working, fixed what's broken, and refused to rubber stamp provisions that would only look good on paper, but would not change eviction timelines in any way. Let's talk about eviction. The mayor's proposal would have allowed landlords to move for evictions based on arrest, weakening due process protections. That isn't just wrong, it's dangerous, especially for communities of color, given the disparities in arrest rates across DC. In fact, I've been in handcuffs before without having committed a single crime. That's why this committee demanded a higher but fair evidentiary standard. You don't lose your home unless you're charged. That is not a high bar. That is not something that takes months or years, but it does at least mean that there has been a finder of fact, a judicial finder of fact that says, yeah, there is some likelihood that this person committed a dangerous crime, and you get a real chance to defend yourself. I should also clarify the DC Code already allows for evictions in many of these circumstances. We also struck the idea that courts could suddenly handle a 10-day turnaround on notices of new rigid timelines. The judges told me, don't write us a check that we can't cash. If we want faster resolution, we have to fill the court vacancies. Until then, let's write laws that work. Let's be honest about TOPA. The original intent, going back to 1980, was clear: keep apartments affordable, stop mass displacement, and give tenants, not lawyers, a real seat at the table. Okay. There's a lot of confusion about the original intent of TOPA, so I want to pull from the official documents. Um, But today, nearly 95% of TOPA rights get assigned, not exercised. Sometimes it's become a negotiation for cash, not a pathway to ownership or long term affordability, which again, I believe has to be our highest priority. When lawyers can hold up a sale for a payout, it raises the cost for everyone. Buyouts get baked into the building price and future rents. This isn't protecting affordability, it's undermining it. And let's look at the data. In the last 2 years, we've seen a 330-day average sale timeline for properties with tenant associations compared to 168 days for others. Investors are telling us loudly that this is why they're skipping DC from Maryland and Virginia. That's why we included a 15-year exemption for new construction. It covers the entire stabilization period and, crucially, wouldn't affect the vast majority of current TOPA transactions, which happen in buildings over 50 years old. I would refer you back to the previous chart showing what a small sliver of fraction of buildings that would be impacted by this 15-year timeline. So we're targeting the real pain points and making DC more investable without gutting tenant rights. If we don't make DC more investable and we continue the sharp decline in multifamily projects, what will happen to the people we represent who can't afford to pay higher rent is going to go up. And people are tired of government not doing what they need to do for the average person who is struggling. But we also protect tenants, adding transparency requirements and restricting cash assignments to cases that genuinely support affordability or habitability, not payouts. This is how you modernize a law while honoring its spirit. On the cost of inaction, here's what's not getting enough airtime. Every year we fail to fix the system, more affordable units disappear, rents climb higher, and families get pushed out. We already have a housing shortage, and it's hurting low income families the most. If investors keep walking, it's not landlords who pay, it's the next renter, the teacher, the social worker, the single parent just trying to keep a roof over their head. And let's kill another myth: rhetoric that DC is anti landlord or that TOPA works perfectly as is hurts our housing market and scares off investment. The cost of doing nothing is unaffordable to everyone, and frankly, would be us abandoning the duty of the council and the housing committee. So, to my colleagues, our job isn't to pass the easiest bill or the one that makes us look the best in the paper. It is to deliver results, the results that residents are asking us for. We owe it to residents to take tough votes, to challenge old assumptions, and admit when a policy, no matter how well intended and even generally how good, needs reform. We said in April we'd move this bill before recess, and we kept that promise. Not for a headline, but because real people need us to get it right. To my colleagues who have engaged this bill with seriousness, and to the council staff who pulled double duty on this in the most difficult budget cycles we faced in years, I want to thank you. It has been a lot of work, and you are the reason we're able to keep this promise. To the mayor and her team, I want to stress again, I've been saying all year, I am here to cooperate, I am here to collaborate, but at some point that has to work both ways. This nonsense about these talking points that are out of line with reality, this insistence that the council just pass the bill that the mayor introduced, is outside of reality and puts the mayor as an advocate and not part of the meaningful process of getting things done. The goal here is not a bill that we can point to and say, look how good I am. I introduced this bill. The goal is to get a bill passed that, one, can actually pass the council, and two, will help people. So I'm proud of the work that we've done here. I'm not running from any part of it. This is what governing looks like. This is the work that we have to do. This is a more difficult time for the city. So this is the occasion that we have to arise to. And so I want us to get to work. With that, is there any discussion on the Rental Act?
Thank you very much, Chairman White. Let me just say that if there were a bill about TOPA, it would be a giant bill. If there were a bill about evictions, it would be a giant bill. If there were a bill about safety and how you manage safety, it would be a giant bill. If there were a bill just about the remaking of the DCHA board, it would be a giant bill. So you have, and I thank you to you for all the work that you and your team have 5 giant bills that you're dealing with. And when you say this is how government works, I mean, I think this is the sausage making right here in front of everybody. And in candor, I don't think this sausage making ends today. I think this is a step along the process in the sausage making around this bill. And we're going to have work between now and the first vote, and there will be work between then and the second vote. It is super important that we get something meaningful done here. I have reservations about a number of the different elements in the bill. And on the one hand, on the safety eviction and the eviction timelines, I want to be persuaded that what we've done is adequate to unclog the eviction process, because I think our eviction process is broken and it has to work. And so folks on the left will be unhappy with that. On the other hand, when you talk about TOPA, I think TOPA has been held up as an enormous impediment to investment in the district, and I don't see it. I think that a lot has been built in the time that TOPA has existed. A lot has been bought and sold in the time that TOPA has existed. We've had 3 buildings in Ward 3 where there have been TOPA transactions. One of them blew up yesterday, but 3 major buildings where there have been TOPA transactions recently that worked smoothly. And our housing market, what is the cause in the slowdown in building in the District of Columbia now? Is it TOPA or is it other factors? And I would submit that it is other factors. And I look at the data on vacancy. I see different numbers on vacancy rates than you do, but we need to compare notes. Also on rents have been going up far more quickly every place else in the region than here in the district. And so and we face a challenge around all the changes in the federal government and things like that. So TOPA gets held up as this is the thing. I don't want TOPA to be an impediment to new investment, but I don't think it is the boogeyman that it's being held up to be. And so in every element of this, and this is the nature of the beast that you've been trying to deal with, there may be space between us in some ways. Some places I may be to the left of you, to some places I may be to the right of you. I really feel for you in the challenge to try to navigate this through. But really, this is sausage making, and this is just a chapter in that process. So with that, I will stop and look forward to the various votes on amendments.
Thank you, Councilmember Fruman. I will say, I want to confirm, it is not just TOPA. TOPA is not the only issue. There are a number of other issues. One of the most common, I think we all hear, is the lack of rent payments, the deficit of rent payments, depending on who you ask, ranges from somewhere around 63 million to I think 125 million. I've heard much higher figures from others. On the eviction timeline, what is important for folks to know, and this goes back to I think the false hope that the mayor's bill gave, there are on average over the past 8 months, 272 eviction cases filed per month for 13 judges. So again, that's not a timeline, the statutory timeline problem. That is a number of judges compared to the number of cases timeline. And on the safety evictions, I think we are in a good place. We have a 20-day requirement for a hearing on the safety eviction, 20 days, 20 days, which we thought was reasonable. So look forward to talking to those more, and we'll discuss some more of this with amendments. Any other comments on the bill?
Chairman.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you, Chairman. I know there are 10 other titles in this bill besides TOPA, so I want to touch on some of those. And Mr. Chairman, I do want to applaud you for your continued stewardship of the Housing Authority. I know that has not been easy. I think your changes to the DCHA board strike the right balance between a lot of competing priorities. Codifying a right to return for public housing residents is a big deal. And the subject of legislation I had introduced a long time ago, I want to thank you for championing it and including it in this bill. I understand some members in industry have concerns about public safety evictions. I'm happy to work with the committee colleagues on continuing that discussion. And I'm glad this print restores DHCD's authority to acquire blighted property. I think this aligns well with our shared priority to enhance the district's ability to acquire and leverage public land. Now, anyone who follows housing issues closely in the district knows I've spent much of my time here on the council advocating for more and more housing in the district and in Ward 1, and have prioritized reforms to our zoning and other ways to reduce zoning barriers to new construction. Where there's room to build some housing, I usually say, let's build it. I've helped put more than 1,200 units of affordable housing in the pipeline in Ward 1, and I'm proud to say that Ward 1 neighborhoods have exceeded the mayor's 2025 housing production targets and have contributed to the biggest increase in affordable housing units this side of the Anacostia River. I say this because I want to be clear that I share people's concerns about declining housing production in the district. The last thing I want to do is implement changes to housing legislation that would contribute to a further decline in production or stand in the way of an increase in housing. I'm confident that we do not have to take away tenant protections in order to accelerate housing production. TOPA was passed in the years directly following the passage of DC Home Rule. It likewise gives tenants their own means of self-determination by giving them a seat at the table. TOPA is about much more than tenant purchases. Between 2006 and 2020, more than 19,000 families were able to successfully negotiate during the sale of their buildings. While some of these negotiations resulted in tenant purchases, TOPA is about giving tenants the power to get what they need, whether it's becoming homeowners or being able to stay in their rental units or moving out with the resources to move into another home of their dreams, not one of last resort. This is why I have maintained a steadfast commitment to TOPA and why I proposed my own legislation earlier this year to make common sense reforms to TOPA and streamline its process. And I am, of course, pleased that most of the provisions in my legislation are now part of this legislation. Expedited transaction timelines, consequences for bad actors who slow down the process or mislead tenants, earlier access to information for tenants about their rights and options. These were almost all based on recommendations from a council-funded study to comprehensively review TOPA from the perspective of tenants, owners, buyers, and others. TOPA is about to celebrate its 50th year as law in the district. By incorporating many overdue procedural reforms to TOPA, we can ensure that it sticks around for the next 50 years. This includes provisions to streamline the TOPA process and stop bad actors who undermine the law, improving the process for tenants, property owners, and prospective buyers. I'll not belabor the philosophical points of who is and isn't deserving of TOPA and what TOPA is meant to do. But I will reiterate that I have serious concerns about the implication of what remains in this bill, and I look forward to considering amendments today. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Nadeau. Any further statements on the bill as presented?
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is a very tough issue for many of us across the District of Columbia. Yes, it's about tenants. Yes, it's about those who provide housing, particularly rental housing, although we all aspire to become homeowners in the District of Columbia. I want to thank you for the work that's gone into this. When you think about 11 different titles, and I know that you decided that at least 3 of them sort of being moved out. That's fine, because there's even more that we need to talk about when we think about the housing ecosystem in the District of Columbia. But I know it's been very difficult to bridge understanding between those who provide the housing and those that live in the housing. And for those who have lived in a particular location for 20, 30 years or longer, this is home. I kind of like own it. I own the neighborhood. And that's a very important concept. And that's a concept that we all cheer for. However, we are at a point in the history of this city where we've got to do something that would be very meaningful so that we can begin to grow our housing stock again. Right now, we're not exciting to investors, and that's how you grow the housing stock. I was reading a note from a law firm that is saying rather succinctly something that I don't think any of us would subscribe to, but it really caught my eye. It says that the version of the law before us it creates a government managed program for buying and selling housing accommodations. And what does that really mean to each and every one of us? It's almost saying that government shouldn't be involved, that the free market will take care of everything. Well, we all know how free market goes, at least in our society here in the city. And so I'm here to be supportive of what we have before us. It's been tough. I know some amendments will be offered, but it's been very tough. And I'll kind of leave it at that because we want to hear the different amendments. But I think when all is said and done, we have to be reasonable. This is not, we cannot create a world for just tenants, nor can we create a world just for the business sector. And so you've tried very hard to mesh the two, and this is a very difficult agenda that you've taken on. But be it as it may, I'm asking the community to go with it, whatever the outcome is. Of course, this will be a markup. We'll have a first vote, and then we'll have a second vote. So thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Councilmember Bonds. Chairman Mendelson.
I'd be fairly brief. I don't agree with the point that was made by one of our colleagues that TOPA has not been a deterrent to investors, and that TOPA, as it has evolved, has not had some adverse effects on the rental housing market. I am a strong supporter of TOPA. I'm a beneficiary of TOPA. I'm reasonably certain the only one at this table who's gone through the TOPA process. So I think there's a lot of value to it, and I think I heard some of that in what Councilmember Bond said. But there's no question in my mind that there need to be some reforms so that the ability of tenants to stay in their housing is protected, but at the same time, the ability or the encouragement for investors to invest in the creation of more housing is promoted.
Thank you, Chairman. This time, let's move to amendments. I believe Councilmember Fruman has a few.
I have one, but thank you very much, Chairman White. I will say, I don't want to say that TOPA has no impact on our housing market. I think of course it does. The question is, to what extent is it a fundamental impediment to investment into properties moving between hands? And I think that can be overstated. I think we need to be real about it. My amendment goes to the 15-year safe harbor for TOPA, from TOPA. And that goes in two directions. So any building that is completed by the date of the passage of this act in the next 15 years, or for 15 years, could be exempt from TOPA. The idea behind that is to encourage a kind of investor who comes in for initial major investments to invest in the District of Columbia with the knowledge that they can then get out of that investment smoothly within a 15-year period. And that has been sold. I've been persuaded that creating that safe harbor can encourage new investment in new building, which is the kind of thing that folks are talking about. What do we need to do in order to encourage that kind of investment? We did this a year or so back when we focused on downtown conversions, and we created a 10-year safe harbor for downtown conversions. That's a setting in which new people who move in have an expectation about what their TOPA rights will be, and they don't have TOPA rights for the first 15 years, and they know it when they come into the building and sign their lease. I think that makes sense, and I think that accomplishes the goal of encouraging new investment, frankly, by major investors who will bring dollars to the District of Columbia. The other piece of it is that 15-year safe harbor goes backwards. So any building built in the last 15 years would be exempt from TOPA under the law as proposed. I don't see that. I don't think that encourages new investment. That's investment that's already happened. I don't think for those tenants, yesterday they had TOPA rights. Tomorrow they might not. There's a trade-off there. There's a difference between going forward and going backwards. So my amendment is to strike the element going backwards and only have the 15-year safe harbor go forward. Now, I don't want to kid you. I think the chairman might have been referring to me in downplaying the impact of TOPA. I think we need to be real. TOPA has an impact, but what's the impact in the setting of going backwards? The impact in the setting of going backwards is that for a new purchaser, there's a discount in the purchase price of that building because they know they're going to have to go through a TOPA process. If there wasn't a TOPA process, they might pay X. Because there's a TOPA process, they might pay X minus something. And that's a real cost to those folks. That is a cost that has been built into their analysis to date. Just as there's been the right to TOPA for the folks in that building that has existed today. I don't think that if you don't provide the safe harbor going backwards, I don't think you keep sales from happening. I'll admit it, you have an impact on the sales price, but you don't keep those sales from happening. And so I don't think we should do that. And in some places, the rhetoric gets incendiary about taking away TOPA rights or not. Here, if it goes backwards, it literally takes away TOPA rights from people who have it today. So my amendment is to keep the 15-year safe harbor going forward and strike the safe harbor going backwards. And with that, I move the amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember Fruman. I think this is a thoughtful amendment, and I understand where you are coming from. I would say a couple of important things I want to go back. This is the one we're still using right now. I want to go back to the substantial drop in production that if we don't turn that around quickly, the rents are going to rise. And so we do have a mission to get investment going and increase confidence in our market. What I found in looking at this, and especially thinking about your amendment, because again, I think there's a lot of thoughtfulness there, is I found that the investors in multifamily properties tend to be repeat investors. And so if we have folks who are invested in recent properties who can't get that money out, that means they can't invest in new housing. So I believe that will have an impact on the amount of housing we are producing, reminding us all that we have less money to put into housing production and HPTF and other programs, the Green Bank. And so we have to make sure capital is funding from somewhere. The other thing I would want us to really be mindful is the sliver of folks who would be impacted by this. So now looking back at this chart, on the very small percentage of buildings built within the last 15 years. This is the buildings built in the past 50 years. And so we're talking about a sliver of a sliver. And of the sliver of a sliver, we're only talking about those who might undergo TOPA. So, I mean, we are talking about a minuscule number of projects, if any. But again, what we do need to do is get money flowing into multifamily housing. Last thing I will say before I see if there are other comments is this mirrors how other housing policies like rent control exemptions are applied retroactively to maintain consistency. So I'll be opposing the amendment, but I do thank you for your thoughtfulness, and I'm happy to talk about it between now and first reading as well. Any further comments on this amendment?
Mr. Chairman, I'm voting in support of the amendment, and I would just request a roll call vote. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything you want to share about the thought around your vote for the amendment for the record?
I think the mover said it all. Thank you.
Okay. Well, with that, we will have a roll call vote. I'm just going to go in order that people are sitting. Chairman Mendelson,
No.
Councilmember Bonds, Chairman White, no. Councilmember Fruman,
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
All right. There are three no's and 2 yeses. The amendment fails. Are there further amendments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Thank you. My amendment was circulated this morning. A draft was also shared with committee staff yesterday after the print was circulated. Chairman White, I want to make it clear on the record, I am profoundly appreciative that you have worked with me and my staff to incorporate many crucial reforms and updates to TOPA where there were initially none. This amendment simply strikes 2 provisions from the committee print, and I believe will open significant loopholes and threats of legal challenge, as well as hindering tenants associations' ability to engage in good faith negotiations. The first provision struck would exempt any property from TOPA if there is a promise of a new income restricted affordability covenant. This raises concerns including administrability. This exemption does not align with existing timelines and notice requirements, and thus it's unclear how it would be applied and enforced. The exemption only applies if an affordability covenant is entered into at the time of sale or transfer. However, an offer of sale must be provided to tenants, quote, before an owner of a housing accommodation may sell the housing accommodation, unquote. Similarly, a notice of transfer must be provided to tenants prior to the transfer being finalized. And under the committee print's language, property owners would be claiming an exemption from TOPA predicated on a commitment that has not yet happened. The second is affordability. The committee print exemption applies to new covenants for buildings if 51% of the units are restricted to 80% median family income or below. For context, 80% MFI for a family of 3 is up to $111,400 per year, and the approved rent for an 80% MFI unit is up to $2,400 per month for a two-bedroom, above the cost of many market rate units in parts of the district. Further, the committee print exemption does not account for the existing rents of a unit, making it possible for a building to be exempt from TOPA even if rents ultimately increase. 3. Difficulties in enforcement. Even if the above issues are addressed, an exemption of this nature would require close monitoring by DHCD for the 20-year period to ensure the rents charged are in line with the covenant, annual reporting requirements are met, and the tenant incomes are recertified annually. The second provision the amendment strikes would restrict the ability for tenants and tenant associations to negotiate a successful TOPA process. A section of the TOPA law that currently allows for, quote, any consideration which the tenant in the tenant's sole discretion finds acceptable, unquote, is narrowed to a list of 5 allowable benefits. According to the draft committee report, the intent is to address cash buyouts, noting that, quote, although buyouts are rare, they often cause consternation, unquote. While well-intentioned, the committee prints amendments to Section 406 of TOPA will not eliminate cash buyouts. Buyouts may happen at any time, regardless of whether TOPA negotiations are in play. In effect, the committee print would push more buyouts outside of the TOPA process when tenants do not have legal representation. It's clear that many council members, residents, and industry representatives share an interest in addressing exploitative buyouts, whether that exploitation impacts the tenant or the buyer. If those issues are to be properly addressed, this committee must consider the matter of buyouts across the board, not just within the confines of legislation on TOPA. Otherwise, this will cause more buyout problems than it solves. I want my colleagues and the public to understand I am quite supportive of reforms to TOPA that will encourage new investments, including exemptions for new construction. I implore this room to consider that these 2 provisions will actually do more to harm investment. And with that, I move the amendment and request a roll call vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Nadeau, for those that thoughtful amendment. So, some of this is technical concerns that I think we can work through, including monitoring and enforcement. But on the substance of the bill, what I think most residents would suggest in DC right now is that people who make good money on paper are absolutely struggling for housing in this city. And one of the things I try to avoid is pitting people who are broke against people who are poor, when all of us have needs and we have to have multiple tools in order to address all of it. So that's to the 80% of I don't know what that means. So that's with the 80%. The other piece of this is when we talk to residents, right? Most residents are going to say, if you ask them their top 2 issues, one is going to be the cost of housing. So the housing committee today has an opportunity to create a substantial number of new affordability covenants. And it would be really odd to me in a housing crisis if we didn't take the opportunity to add affordability covenants because we wanted to prioritize payouts to individual residents. Now, as I said earlier, if you can have it all, that is wonderful, but that's not where we are. And so we have to look at the greatest good for the city. The other thing that gives me some concern, and I want to make sure we are consistent as a council, we have almost consistently opposed voluntary agreements. Voluntary agreements are agreements where a landlord can pay a current tenant money to sell out future tenants, to raise the rents on future tenants, right? That's kind of exactly what we do here. Because as I said earlier, the payout money doesn't come from nowhere and it doesn't disappear. That cost gets transferred to the next residence. And so it is inconsistent for us to oppose voluntary agreements and support cash payouts when both of them have the same effect on the next renters. we have to be concerned with protecting and preserving the affordability in our city beyond everything else. So we just got to call ourselves to the time that that we are in now. And so I have substantial concerns about the impact that this amendment would have on the cost of housing, and would remind colleagues that we ended the moratorium, that we have taken steps to chip away at voluntary agreements for very similar reasons. So I will oppose this amendment, but again, happy to continue to have conversations between now and first reading.
Chairman White, can I just chime in a little on this one? So there is a genuine sort of philosophical tension. One idea about what TOPA is about is to preserve affordability. Another idea is to preserve some input from tenants who have lived in a building for an extended period of time on their future. The seller is not going to be there. The tenants and the buyer are. And so I hear you where you're coming from on affordability, but there is a different side to it as well. And I think one's not right and one's not wrong. They're both out there. We just had an experience in Ward 3 where a building was subject to a TOPA process, and an investor came in and they wanted to do a covenanted approach to that building. And honestly, when I saw what they proposed, I thought, far out, that sounds like a great thing to do. And I was quite supportive. The tenants overwhelmingly voted for a different approach. Not close, overwhelmingly voted for a different approach. They didn't vote for it because of cash payouts. Cash payouts in big buildings, it's a rare thing. The thing about cash payments is, to the extent that they make it possible to close a deal by having some small number of people receive a payout, I'm supportive of where Councilmember Nadeau is coming from, but that's not what happened in this very setting, where the tenants chose an approach that was different than the covenanted approach, but also preserved housing, and did it in a way where the tenants and the new purchaser, W.C. Smith, so not a small entity, had worked together. I think that was a positive outcome. Yesterday, after the provisions saying that a covenanted approach would be a safe harbor from TOPA, the seller withdrew the offer to sell. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if there is a link between this legislation and that move, but there could be. And what you could end up with is, because of the safe harbor created for a covenanted building here, the approach that ends up being taken might be exactly the opposite of what the vast majority of those tenants approved, and was on the way to leading to increased investment in their buildings. So I am supportive of Councilmember Nadeau's amendment, even as I understand where you're coming from in having a goal of maximizing affordability.
Thank you, Councilmember Fruman. And I just want to clarify, I don't think I was clear enough about this. The bill that we're marking up today allows tenants assignments of rights for building affordability, unit and building improvements, energy efficiency upgrade, moving expenses, and reasonable legal fees. So what we're trying to do is, in a world where there's not endless money, making sure the money primarily goes to affordability and maintenance of the building. Again, good for the masses over benefits to the individuals. But you are right, this is a difficult issue.
So, and if I can just add, and I won't belabor it. So I hear you, and this is a process that's going to keep moving forward. I can see guardrails on buyouts for sure. But in a certain way, like relocation expenses, it's kind of a buyout. So let's keep working together on that piece of it. But again, in principle supportive of Councilmember Nadeau's amendment.
I appreciate it. And I hope what folks see is, I mean, even yesterday and Monday, I'm having long meetings with folks who still want to talk about specific provisions. Happy to keep doing that and working to make it better. Did we vote on that?
Not yet.
No.
There we are.
May I say one more thing, Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. In my remarks, I focused mainly on the technical aspects of the amendment, but I do want to specifically speak to the covenant piece, because when you think about what's going on in a TOPA deal, think, well, a lot of times tenants are going to choose to maintain affordability. And so what's the difference if, a covenant can be put in place instead? And I think the difference is really the process tenants go through under TOPA allows them to identify real needs that they have and the building has. So for example, they may want to negotiate for affordability. They also might need to negotiate for substantial repairs. They might need to negotiate for certain security concerns or any number of things going on in a building. And if putting a covenant in place is done in lieu of allowing the tenants to come to the table, then we really are eliminating the entire opportunity for tenant voice in that process, whether they choose affordability alone or something else, or choose to purchase or something entirely different. And I think that's really the point of it. I look forward to voting on this measure. I'll wrap up now, Mr. Chairman, but I thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll work together because I'm not sure that what you're mentioning is not allowed in this bill, but I'll work with you to see if there's some tweaks we need to make.
Chairman, can I just make one request?
Yeah.
It does sound like you have some interest in working together on this amendment, on what I'm proposing here between now and first reading. Could I ask that in good faith you support the amendment and we make the tweaks after we vote?
Nice try, Councilmember Nadeau. I don't think they're necessary, but I will keep.
Got to try. Thank you.
On Councilmember Nadeau's amendment, Chairman Mendelson,
No.
Councilmember Bonds. Myself, Chairman White, no. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
There are 3 noes and 2 yeses. The noes have it and the amendment fails. I want to again thank my colleagues, thank everybody who has engaged with us. It has been hundreds and hundreds of people and dozens and dozens and dozens of hours between hearings, community meetings, and meetings in my office. With that, I move the Rental Act with leave for staff to make technical and conforming changes. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
I'd like to request a roll call vote, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Mendelson,
Aye.
Councilmember Bonds, Chairman White, yes. Councilmember Fruman,
Present.
Councilmember Nadeau.
No.
All right, 3 yeses, 1 no, and 1 voting present. The bill passes. And the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Again, I want to thank my colleagues and all the members of the public. The report. Oh, did we do a vote on the report? Yeah, thank you. All right. So we should vote on this report. I hope you all read this report. This is a magnificent report. And I want to give hats off to the entire legislative team, but particularly Kate Conquest. Yeah, it was hard work. It's also just really good. I want to vote on the report. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? The ayes have it, and the report is passed and incorporated. With that, all the business before the committee is done. I've been kicked in the teeth enough this week. So talk to me next week about this. But again, truly want to thank everybody who's engaged in this. But business before this committee is concluded. The time is now 10:38 a.m. and we are adjourned.